At 4:12 a.m. on December 14, 1944, the Belgian frontier was a graveyard of frozen iron and black water. The air was a thick, frigid curtain that tasted of wet wool, wood smoke, and the copper tang of blood. Every breath felt like inhaling glass. Oberleutnant Hans Vogel stood on a reinforced wooden platform overlooking the on-high marshes, a stretch of land the Americans had started calling Suicide Swamp. To Vogel, it was a natural fortress. Between his MG-42 nest and the American lines lay 300 yards of waist-deep anaerobic sludge, tangled roots, and jagged, icy reeds. He adjusted his leather gloves and looked out at the black mirrors of the water, confident that no man could cross silently. He turned to his subordinate, leaned against the timber railing, and reached for a cigarette, savoring the warmth of a match. In the next 40 seconds, he would be dead. While Vogel enjoyed his perceived superiority, Private Silas Thorne was breathing through a hollow reed, submerged in 2 feet of stinking mud. He wasn't using a landing craft, and he wasn't carrying a standard-issue flamethrower. He was clutching a 12-foot cane pole modified with a serrated blade and a pull-string detonator. What happened next flipped military doctrine on its head. It was a maneuver explicitly forbidden by high command, an act of suicidal insubordination that broke every rule in the West Point playbook. Silas Thorne didn't come from a line of generals or tactical theorists. He came from the Atchafalaya Basin of Louisiana, a place where the map ends and the water begins. Before the war, Silas was a gigger, a man who hunted bullfrogs and alligator gar in the pitch-black swamps. In the bayou, you don't hunt with a rifle. The sound carries for miles and ruins the night. You hunt with a long pole and a quick, silent wrist. Silas understood the anatomy of a swamp better than any mapmaker. He knew how to displace his weight to move through water without breaking the surface tension, creating ripples no larger than a water strider's footprint. He understood the geometry of a long-reach strike from a low-angle position, a skill learned while balanced on the prow of a cypress skiff. When Silas enlisted, his instructors at Fort Benning were baffled and frustrated. During bayonet drills, he held his weapon at an unnatural low center of gravity that ignored the Army's thrust and parry rigid mechanics. During stealth exercises, he moved with a crawling, serpentine pace that the Army deemed too slow for the rapid advance required of infantry. They saw a quiet, uneducated country boy who couldn't grasp the modern mechanics of warfare. They missed the fact that Silas wasn't training for a battle. He was stalking prey in a way no manual could ever teach. The tactical problem was a meat grinder designed by the devil. 3 German pillboxes were elevated on stilts above the swamp, providing a 270-degree field of fire. To take them, the 9th Infantry had to charge across open water, a death sentence for any man with a soul. The official methods had already filled the mud with bodies and the air with screams. Corporal Thomas Red Miller, 21 from Dayton, Ohio, died in the first wave. He was a gifted mechanic who had a 6-year-old daughter waiting for him. She would keep his last mud-stained letter in a cedar box for the next 60 years, reading it until the ink faded to nothing. Private Leo Danzig, only 19 from Brooklyn, was cut down seconds later. He was a violin prodigy with a scholarship to Juilliard waiting for him. They died because the reconnaissance was flawed and the strategy was stubborn. Despite the mounting slaughter, Captain Sterling, a man with pressed trousers and a polished sidearm that had never seen mud, demanded a 3rd frontal assault. He dismissed Silas's suggestion of a submerged approach as cowardice and civilian logic. To Sterling, if a tactic wasn't in the Field Manual 710, it didn't exist. He valued the rigid adherence to the book over the lives of the men bleeding out in the freezing reeds, more concerned with his reputation than the growing casualty list. While the unit rested in a state of shell-shocked exhaustion, Silas Thorne crawled to the edge of the tree line and simply watched. He stayed there for 3 hours, ignoring the hunger and the cold, observing a tiny flaw the West Point strategists had missed. The German guards, including Gefreiter Klaus Müller, focused their eyes on the horizon, expecting a silhouette or the wake of a boat. They ignored the dead space directly beneath their floorboards. Silas noticed a gap of only 14 inches between the water's surface and the wooden support beams of the pillbox. He didn't need to blow the door. He just needed to reach the floor. He visualized the anatomy of the structure. The thin pine planks were the only things separating the guards from the swamp. Silas presented his plan to use a modified cane pole to deliver silent vertical strikes through the gaps in the timber. Captain Sterling's face turned a deep, furious crimson. He threatened Silas with a court-martial for unauthorized field modifications and dereliction of duty. He called the plan primitive and insane, but as the sun dipped and the mist rolled in, Silas went rogue. He prepared in secret, stripping his gear to minimize weight until he was just a man and a blade. He blackened his face with burnt cork and gripped his improvised 12-foot weapon. He had no support, no radio, just a civilian tool intended for the bayou, now repurposed for the Reich. The air smelled of fermented rot and cordite. The mud sucked at Silas's boots with every agonizing step, trying to pull him under. He was entirely submerged, only his nose and eyes breaking the surface, moving with a clinical, predatory patience. He reached the first pylon. Above him, he heard the German guards laughing about the easy war they were fighting. Silas calculated the geometry. The pole had to rise at a 75-degree angle to clear the support beam and find the gap. He felt the weight of the Springfield bayonet he'd lashed to the tip of the cane with salvaged communications wire. He exhaled halfway, held, squeezed the pole upward. The blade slid through the floorboards with a sickening thwack. A sharp, wet gasp followed. Vogel didn't even have time to reach for his alarm. Silas didn't wait. He moved to the next pylon with the patient, rhythmic movement of a ghost. The movement was staccato, precise, lethal. Thrust, twist, retract. Thrust, twist, retract. One guard slumped over his MG-42, his life draining through the floorboards into the swamp below. Another, Obergura fighter Schmidt, was silenced before he could reach his Luger. Silas moved through the suicide swamp, using the 12-foot reach to kill men whom never even saw a ripple in the water. By the time he reached the third pillbox, 22 guards lay dead or dying in the dark, and the impenetrable fortress had become a silent tomb. By dawn, the American path was clear. The 9th Infantry moved through the swamp without taking a single casualty, stepping over the silent, empty nests of the enemy. Silas Thorne had saved the lives of hundreds of men by ignoring the doctrine of his superiors and trusting his own instincts. In the months that followed, the Army eventually adopted silent swamp infiltration and improvised reaching weapons into their official doctrine, but the records never mentioned the man from Louisiana. There was no Medal of Honor for the man with the stick. Captain Sterling took the credit for the coordinated stealth maneuver, earning a promotion while Silas's court-martial threat was quietly dropped on the condition that he never spoke of his unorthodox methods again. When the war ended, Silas didn't stay for the parades or the photo ops in Paris. He went back to the Atchafalaya Basin. He went back to the quiet water, the cicadas, and the simplicity of the hunt. He had frogs to catch and a life to live far away from the world of rigid men and maps. To the world, he was just another veteran in a dusty uniform. To the men of the 9th Infantry who survived that December morning, he was the ghost of the suicide swamp, the man who won a war with a fishing pole. If you found this story compelling, please like this video. Subscribe to stay connected with these untold histories.